Could games go above $70? Embracer CEO weighs in. The reality is, no one has tried it. Embracer CEO Lara Wingsforce has commented on the possibility of raising the price of major games from the industry standard of $70 to something above that. Sparking to GI.biz, Wingforce said the video game industry is no different than other businesses in that inflation and production costs continue to rise. Wingforce said it's been hard to increase prices for premium games in the console and PC space, and due to this, the margin to success is less. Prices beyond $70 for new game releases is not out of the realm of possibility, Wingforce said, and it might take one company being a first mover and seeing how the market responds. This really, the reality is no one has tried it. If you create an enormous RPG, for example, with 100 or 150 hours of gameplay, very polished and unique experience, would the consumer be willing to pay more? If they would have more products potentially coming to market, but no one tried it, he said. The executive went on to say that Embracer has been discussing this very thing. However, for the time being at least, Embracer is following the wider industry and keeping its price at $70. Of course, many game companies charge more than $70 for new games when considering deluxe special editions. Many games today, including single player titles, also have microtransaction systems built into them that provide another revenue stream for the publisher beyond the initial purchase price. Would it be that one company one day tries to increase pricing? That remains to be seen, he said. Another possibility, Wingforce said, is that Embracer might consider making shorter games that could help lower costs and increase the upside potential. But at what it's worth, 2024's best-selling game so far in the US, Helldivers 2, is priced at $40. I just believe there are consumers willing to engage in those amazing RPGs and other single-player games, and ultimately they are willing to spend money on them. Do you increase pricing or do you make them shorter? He said. I think it would be very sad if everything just became big multiplayer in game monetization titles. There are millions of consumers willing to engage more in classic games. Some have theorized Grand Theft Auto 6 could launch at a price above $70 for its standard edition. After all, Take Two was one of the first companies to raise prices from $60 to $70 for new releases, and some believe the company might go up another $10 for GTA 6. That remains to be seen, but CEO Strauss Zelnick said the company's aim is to over-deliver on value against cost. As for Embracer, the company recently included a cost-cutting program that resulted in hundreds of layoffs, canceled games, studio closures, and more dramatic changes. The name Embracer is going away in the future, but Wingforce maintains the change is not due to bad press. Okay, so let's get some comments. Guitar Warrior 86 or 66 goes, you can even make it $500. Honestly, it wouldn't make any difference to me because I don't even get them for free on Epic Game Store because new games suck hard since 10 years ago. I have had lots of games I could play already, so I can easily skip new games. That's not better than the games I can play. Media Stupid One goes, there are people dumb enough that pay the extra $10 to $20 to play a game 2 days early, even digital, so this doesn't surprise me. Nintendians goes, if it goes any higher, it better come with bug and glitches free on day one, paid early access, with better campaign story plots too. So, what do you think of gaming companies possibly moving up from $70 to even higher prices for new games? This Embracer CEO goes, he was asked if $70 games could go higher if he thinks the market would pay. And he did say that like for RPG titles that are 100, 150 hours of gameplay and polished and not nickel and diming the player, that could work. But um, but like he said, maybe make games shorter to cut cost. Um, do you think people would be willing to pay 80, 90, $100 for new games?
Well, we've been doing this for a good decade now, where games that are like base game like $65, and then recently turned to $70, and 25, 30 years ago it was like $50 and if not $40. So it's adjusted for inflation. So eventually the market will adjust itself as long as it's not artificially inflated. So I don't mind spending $70 for games right now because obviously these are more expensive, more complex hardware of consoles with more complex graphics and more complex gameplay. And in my perspective, it's best just like make sure it doesn't increase too much in every single generation of gaming, but just enough where people can afford to. And I'm not trying to be like anti-consuming here, where it's like, oh, you want things to be very cheap and all, but at the same time, these games are expensive to make after a while, and the AAA games are pretty much it's faltering from its quality though because of the volumetric proportions of the game in itself. So it's all about basically having a creative mind with a decent budget and a proper management of time with your how to create certain games, and they can just balance it out properly over time. It can be a good game like Red Dead Redemption 2, Max Payne 3, or even games like Sonic Mania, if ever. It's so that small stat. It's that was successful of its own sales and all. Um, but I don't know. $70 it's a big price to buy games now. I had to sacrifice some bills for that to get that kind of game or games. That's what I did with Modern Warfare 2 2022 back 2 or 3 years ago when the game price was like $75 for everything for the base game. That is so.
Yeah, that's basically that's basically the issue. I mean, the reason games people don't want to pay more for games is because the quality has fallen. This whole releasing game with game-breaking bugs and we'll fix it later, and then sometimes the game doesn't get fixed at all. That's why people don't want to pay $70, and then they're paying $70 for a game that's basically a digital store on top of that.
Yeah,
So like if you did release like an open world RPG that that was like as long as Red Dead Redemption 2 or even smaller, but like Max Payne 3, I guess I forget how long Max Payne 3 took to complete. Um, but then again, it did have replayability, so
oh yeah,
if you had yeah if people would be willing to pay the price if it was if it was worthy of that price. But releasing a game with game breaking bugs on day one, releasing a game that's full of microtransactions, that's not quality. That's decrease in quality. um
mm,
so what game developers really need to do, and these gaming executives need to do, is make sure the product, when you like during the PS2 era, it was really uncommon to have a game that was broken
oh yeah,
at launch. It still happened, but it wasn't as common as it's become. So you know, yeah, create it. And the thing is, like, if your game's just 8 to 10 hours, it's not worth more than $70. It's probably not even worth $70. Um,
hmm
so yeah, if the game is long, like Alan Wake, the first Alan Wake, you could complete it like in 10 hours. Maybe the DLC extended it a couple more hours on top of that. But
yeah,
other than that, that's not something that's worth more than 60. Um, so like if you're talking about games that provide a long time to play, a lot of play time, that's one thing. But it also counts on the quality and how much you're trying to nickel and dime the player. People don't want to pay $70 to be advertised to. Um,
yeah,
So it really depends. Yeah, it really depends on how many hours, and maybe if you can't focus on, if you can't do these larger games, why can't you break them up and release the future pat and release part of the game, and then release like longer later levels as DLC and stuff.
oh yeah,
But make sure the game functions. Make sure the game is playable. I mean, you don't just. I mean, look at Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League. Look at the state that
yeah,
game released in. That
oh
game's
yeah,
not worth 70 cents, let alone $70. Well, maybe it's worth 70 cents, but nothing more. Um, so yeah, these games, people would pay for them, but they gotta be, they gotta feel like it's worth their money.
oh yeah, definitely.
And if you can't do that, just release shorter games and allow these levels, but create the longer levels for DLC. And if it's a functioning game and you're not nickel and diming the player to death, maybe they'd be willing to spend more. Oh, this game's only $20, but it had DLC. I'll try the DLC for $10 more. Stuff like that. I mean, like they said, Helldivers 2 is the most uh, best-selling game of 2024, and it's only $40.
Wow.
So, um, yeah. So it's not. I mean, I'm not saying people wouldn't pay the price, but you're gonna have to give people a reason to pay that price. And with what most gaming executives are focused on doing, that's not. People aren't gonna buy that.
I
Anything else to
understand.
add, or need to move on for the final topic tonight?
I just want to say one more thing though, that the $70 game price should stay for another, at least for another generation, and then after that, keep on increasing. But if you have to increase it to $80, $90, so be it. But that's why it increases the quality as well as the timing of these games to be released properly as well without the bugs and all. So if they can just match it appropriately to the prices and all, to the timing of the release of the games for these prices, everything will be good, and we'll just smooth sailing. So that's how I look at it. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I just want to say, like for example, let's just take one of my favorite PS3 games of all time, Bloodstone 007.
Okay.
Um, I love that game. I wish there was more to play of that game. Unfortunately, I have to find more James Bond games, um, because the sequel to Bloodstone 007 was ended up being canceled. But the thing is, if they wanted, why not? Why didn't they just make the sequel DLC levels? You know, I mean, they would um the game was supposed to have a sequel. Now that sequel got canceled, so Bloodstone 007 will always be a cliffhanger. But
Oh yeah.
let's take Bloodstone 007 when it was released, $40 or 60. It was probably 60 because it was a PS3 game. Um,
Yeah.
but like I'm saying, they should have, that it was a good game. It was a fun game. They had multiplayer that you could play online, so it wasn't just a one and done single player adventure. But they could have also added more levels or created the sequel through DLC packs. And then, and like I said, I used Bloodstone because Bloodstone was a great game. It was great quality. It was, there was it worked right away. It worked throughout the entire game. You didn't have game breaking bugs or graphical bugs or anything. Whoever made Bloodstone really cared about making a great game.
Oh yeah.
So they could have continued with. So that's what I'm saying. Like if let's say you're gonna create the next James Bond game, okay, make sure it works all the way through on day one, or at least into the later parts of the game. You know, um, because I know the Wolf Among Us had problems once you got to like chapter 4 or 5. Um, so make sure as far as you can that there's no bugs or anything, or that most of the bugs have been fixed before you ship the game out. Um, and if people love the game and they love the story, uh, offer more DLC because if they're going to want to continue playing the game, they'll buy the DLC. But the DLC is also going to have a captivating story of its own, or it's got to be just as captivating as the base game. Um,
That's what happened to Halo 3. It was so successful with DLCs and all that. Me personally, I was willing to wait the last map pack to come out like months later, rather than weeks, if not months later. So, they did good sales on the release of the game, then the DLC, then the year one edition, if there's such thing. It was good that they did back in the 2000s, early to mid to late 2000s, and after that, it just I don't know what happened, but it's all about greed now. It's not about how making
yeah,
a good quality game. It's all about how much can we sell it for the short term, and that's it.
yeah, that's the problem. And they're willing to forego quality for the quick buck. That's
Indeed.
why people don't want to pay $70, $80, $90. So what I'm saying is, if you're gonna make a game, um, make sure it works, make sure it's captivating, make sure people want to play it, and if people do want to play it, um, if you can't make if Red Dead Redemption 2, Grand Theft Auto 5, if you can't make games that long, because it's not cost effective, then make games that are shorter and then just release the rest of the game in DLC packs. But make sure the
Indeed.
DLC packs actually have something, not like AEW where three wrestlers cost $25. Um, it's got to be, a decent. It's got to feel like it's worth the value of that DLC pack or whatever's being charged for that DLC. But yeah, make shorter games with DLC or make longer games, but shorter games would help cut the cost. And then if that game is getting great reviews and everything, like I said, DLC afterwards.
Indeed.
But you, but but if you're gonna go for 80, 90, $100 a game, you better give a player the reason to spend that money. And that's just what we haven't been getting from many game developers or game publishers, I should say.